Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, January 23, 2026. Time in Texas about 10 a.m. Some of the things we'll cover. Coast to coast cold. And Minnesota. Takedown coming, we believe. President Trump. Deliverance strike. And Greenland and Iran. What's up with that? So we're going to begin with the space weather. We do have the sun turning to face the Earth with many sunspots on it, from which we could expect M to X flares in the next week or so. And we have Earth. Now, we've been undergoing, I know, since the 1990s. We have had a takedown of the Earth's electromagnetic shield. This happens on a cycle basis of tens of thousands of years. We've been in a pole shift, I personally know about since the 1990s. So we do have that going on. We know we had information about a binary sun that has come in that operates on a cycle of tens of thousands of years, also coming in. We had a recent picture in Saudi Arabia showing two suns. We are experiencing on Earth a change in weather, earthquakes, volcanoes, and oceans, and so on, that does occur on a cycle of tens of thousands of years. We have evidence from many areas, including ancient civilizations we've recovered through archaeology. We do have scientific evidence from ocean cores, ice cores, and so on of a change in Earth's magnetic fields, which is what occurs in a pole shift when the north and south polarity of the Earth changes. So that is what we are experiencing right now, and we will continue to see more dramatic changes on the Earth, especially with something we can see with our own lying eyes, a change in weather patterns. And all of these changes are bringing about a change in our jet streams and ocean currents, which do manage our climate operation on Earth, and in the past, which has been predictable. Now, due to changes in space, changes on Earth, we will see a change in our weather patterns. Now, Mike from around the world, we believe, works for the U.S. government. Mike knows stuff. I usually listen to him on Pastor Paul Begley's Thursday night programs, and I have found him to be a reliable source. He's also a Christian, and I know that some of the things Mike has put forth, he has heard from God. I also have heard similar things, so I place a lot of confidence in his information and his information coming out along science lines. I can attest to, I was a science major. I used to teach high school science. So I'm familiar with that information. So I place a lot of value in Mike from around the world and being a reliable source of information that I have found to be believable. Now, he several years ago put out the information that we would see changes on the earth, as I've said, and we would see in the U.S. coast-to-coast storms. And that's what we're seeing right now with this historic cold system coming into the U.S. to impact the U.S. coast to coast. Now, Mike says it will last 5 to 6 days. And with the many areas experiencing cold below zero, are in many areas 15 degrees. 15 degrees, I can attest to in Texas, along the south coast of Texas, is extreme weather for us to experience. Now in Texas and all across the U.S., we're seeing governors stand up and making declarations of emergency, pre-positioning linemen to fix any power lines that go down. I know in the state of Texas, our grid has been strengthened in the last few years since we had a significant cold front in 2021 and Hurricane Beryl. And Governor Abbott of Texas says we have plenty of power. However, this storm is to bring a significant cold along with rain, which may put ice on electrical lines and they would break. But I know in Texas and other states in the U.S., they have pre-positioned, electrical grid support teams to immediately fix any lines that go down. Apparently, the cold we will experience in the U.S. coast to coast will be historic and life-threatening. And I know I'm recommending to my family members, it's best to stay off of the roads if they have ice on them, for sure. In Texas, we're not, in many areas of Texas, the southern half of Texas, we're not used to driving on ice. So that's going on. And we have this. And correlating with earth changes, the cycle I'm talking about goes a war cycle and also goes an economic change. So we're seeing gold up today at $5,000 an ounce, silver up to $100 per ounce. And now we have this from Space Weather on YouTube, formerly Suspicious Observers, a white paper talking about the collapse of the ocean currents. Now, this is the way that, so we have the Earth, we have a jet stream in the air, we also have ocean currents that modulate our climate. This was a God-created system that's worked very well, but it's changing now. When the ocean currents collapse and no longer make their normal current movements around the Earth, we have then changes in our weather patterns. This occurs when in the Arctic areas we have melting, which is what we're seeing now in the Arctic, and one of the reasons President Trump is pressing for U.S. control of Greenland is that this will also change shipping lanes and other things. We do currently see that occurring. So the Arctic melts, it puts fresh water into our ocean currents that then takes down the movement of the ocean currents by diluting the salinity in the water, the salt content in the water. I know when I was a child and went to the beach, I would get that salt water in my eyes. It would sting. And I asked God, why is salt in the oceans? Well, later when I went to college and studied these things, I found out salt makes the water denser, therefore it sinks. And this contributes then to the movement of the ocean currents. If we have a massive influx of fresh water from the Arctic melting into the ocean currents, then this will stop the ocean currents, and this will stop the control over our predictable climate systems. So yeah, we're in it now, baby. So that's going on. We also had an unusual earthquake, 4.7 in Wyoming. So we know about California continues to shake. I think it's something now like 500 quakes, 3 and down, and some are above magnitude 3 in different areas of California, adjacent and impacting the San Andreas fault line. And we have the USGS predict in the next, now it would be 7 to 8 days, a magnitude 6 to 7 to occur in California. This is consistent with changes on Earth in our weather and other systems. So the 4.7 in Wyoming, so we have California. We also have that Yellowstone area in the U.S. as well as the New Madrid seismic zone. 3 major areas in the U.S. where we could expect to see significant earthquakes. So that's going on. As Hal Turner says, it's probably time to get right with God. I couldn't agree more. So Mike from around the world said, expect coast-to-coast storm systems in the U.S., coast-to-coast hurricanes, coast-to-coast Arctic cold systems, coast-to-coast atmospheric rivers, massive flooding. So that's going on. And now what do we see going on in the U.S. In a deep state coordinated move against the federal government and against the U.S. Constitution? We know that Minnesota has been a hot spot. Now, I listened yesterday to J.V. Vance's speech. He went to Minnesota and met with ICE, and he talked about it's time to tone down the agitation level of the rioters in Minnesota. I believe are being paid by Alex Soros, deep state NGOs. We know that President Trump was successful in the beginning of the second term with DOGE in defunding U.S. AID that funded a lot of deep state controlled NGOs in the U.S. They were actively fomenting communism in the U.S. and fomenting insurrection against the U.S. government. That's been going on. And oh yes, at that Davos meeting in Switzerland, Scott Bessent spoke and talked about the commie Dem governor of California, Gavin Newsom, being accompanied to Davos by his sugar daddy billionaire, Alex Soros. So we can see California is also on the hot seat, I believe. So J.D. Vance went to Minnesota to meet with ICE and gave a speech. And he talked significantly about needing cooperation with the governor, Waltz, also a commie Dem, and the mayor of Minneapolis, Frey, F-R-E-Y, also a commie Dem, working with the U.S. government. ICE is only there to arrest criminal illegals. Now, I heard J.D. Vance's explanation for a rumor that had been going around in Minneapolis that ICE was arresting children. And J.D. Vance explained it, that ICE arrested an adult male. He was with his 5-year-old son. ICE then checked the house to see if any other adults were there, and there wasn't anyone around to take charge of the child. So ICE arrested the father and took the child and placed the child in protective custody of, a child management system. We had then the governor of Minneapolis, the mayor of Minneapolis, Frey, coming out and giving a pushback speech against J.D. Vance and putting forth as truth that ICE was arresting children. So we see a move by both the state governor, Waltz of Minnesota, and the mayor of Minneapolis, Frey, in working against the U.S. government and lying straight up to their constituents. And rather than trying to tone down chaos in Minneapolis by the paid commie agitators, the rioters, both Waltz and Frey are juicing it up. Deep state operatives, I believe. And we have this from Steve Quayle's aggregate site, Discern Report, that there had been in St. Paul, Minnesota, a group who went into a church January 18 to disrupt worship services, which is illegal according to the FACE Act of the U.S. And so some arrests have been made. Now, the paid commie agitators, accompanied by Don Lemon, former CNN anchor, went to a church, City's Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, because one of the 8 pastors there, David Easterwood, is also an acting director of the local ICE office. So we see this group illegally going into a church to disrupt worship services based on politics. So some arrests have been made. Pam Bondi of the DOJ, working with the FBI, have made arrests. They arrested a commie Dem agitator leader, Nakoma Levy Armstrong, who's also an attorney, who it appears has, when she worked for the NAACP, was able to benefit herself by sucking up $1 million in welfare, and I'm probably correct in saying it was some type of fraud. So she's been arrested. There was a second well-known operatives there, William Kelly, a.k.a. The Woke Farmer. That's on his TikTok platform, I believe. He's also been arrested. Don Lemon, an arrest warrant was being obtained through a federal magistrate in Minnesota, but the federal judge would not sign the arrest warrant, saying that Don Lemon was a reporter, not a participant. Well, I believe he streamed the attack on the church. So, and it's being put forth, his actions could also label him as being a participant. So we'll have to see what happens to Don Lemon. So 2 people have been arrested so far, and the second individual, William Kelly. Apparently, he's been putting out false information about his military service. Dan Bongino, a former FBI deputy director, put this out about William Kelly. He did serve in the military 2007 to 2011. He was an HR admin person, his MOS 42A. Dan Bongino puts forth that William Kelly never served in a combat role, never went overseas, and he was not a warrant officer. He was dishonorably discharged from the military in 2011 on charges of larceny, theft. He was court-martialed and put out of the military. He's now been also arrested. So we have this coming from a source that President Trump is now putting finishing touches on domestic restoration operation to return America, to constitutional republic status, to change our financial system, taking down the Federal Reserve Plus. So we have been seeing positioning of U.S. military across America, and this is being put forth. Also pre-positioned are U.S. military JAG, that's attorneys in the military, and U.S. military intel locations, and they are intent on taking down the deep state network that operates across the U.S. in multiple states, where the state governors are in collusion with the deep state and most probably the CCP. And President Trump and the U.S. military have set up U.S. military bases in 17 states, and they are getting ready to stage paratroopers out of Alaska, 11th Airborne, plus hundreds of military police. The military police will be under the direction of JAG officers, that's U.S. military attorneys. And the military police then, under the Insurrection Act, which it's believed to kick all this off, President Trump will sign the Insurrection Act. And we're seeing in Minnesota the Commie Dem Governor Walz talking about rogue federal agents. We see the Minneapolis Mayor Fry working with 5 NGOs, in other words, paid groups in Minneapolis to target ICE agents. We also see the Minnesota AG, Attorney General Keith Ellison, working in concert with these groups against the U.S. government. Now, this includes commie Dem governors in multiple states, including Minnesota, New York, Illinois, and California. Under the Insurrection Act, the U.S. military then will take control of major cities and begin to arrest paid insurrectionists against the U.S. government. And the U.S. during this process of Insurrection Act, U.S. military arrest, the U.S. military will take control of communication systems in the U.S., including satellites and the internet. And the U.S. military will make arrests and has apparently legal proof of governors and other individuals in several states colluding with foreign nations to act against the U.S. government. And we have this. This also includes, so arrest will include governors, mayors, also federal judges who are working in collusion with the deep state, and also corporate directors, presidents of big pharma, big tech. And the arrest will be done by the military police at the direction of U.S. military attorneys. And then these people will face U.S. military tribunals. So we, the people, say to President Trump, bring a deliverance strike in the U.S. And we have this. Charges against these individuals will include treason, conspiracy, aiding foreign nations against the U.S., trafficking, biowarfare, and fraud against the U.S. government. So that's going on. And we will see a change in our financial system, a taking down of the Federal Reserve, a basis of value in gold for our currency and our banks. It's all good. And the signs you can see that this is occurring is sudden resignations of federal, state, and local officials, presidents of big companies, and also sudden outages of communication systems in the U.S., which we saw last week. So that's going on. The taking down of NGOs, which we saw President Trump do with DOGE, taking down the money from the federal government from many NGOs. The objective of restoring America will be to restore America to being a constitutional republic where we will have a real economic system based on gold and a real court system. So it's all good. And now we have this. We'll talk about Greenland. So we know that President Trump went to Davos, that global economic meeting, Davos. He brought about the Board of Peace. And I can say this. President Trump sent out invitations to 60 nations. That happened Monday. And to join the Board of Peace. Initial goal of the Board of Peace is to bring about peace and restoration in Gaza. And he sent out invitations to 60 nations at Davos. I think we had 23 nations signing, and many others are considering. I put this forth that it's going to be easy to see which nations are not controlled by the deep state and are true allies of the U.S. by the nations that sign on to the Board of Peace. At Davos, Mark Carney, leader of Canada, and we have seen Canada working against its own citizens to disarm them. That's been going on for over a year. And we see Canada colluding with the CCP and making major agreements with the CCP. Then Mark Carney at Davos got up and made an anti-America and an anti-Trump speech. President Trump then has disinvited Canada to sign on to the Board of Peace. Way to go, President Trump. And we have this. So we're getting some details on some details about President Trump's framework for working in Greenland. So some of these details we have from sources. The government and President Trump have not come out and said, yes, this is working, but we have to believe something happened significant that President Trump could take to the bank regarding Greenland, because we saw President Trump at Davos say he would not use the U.S. military to take Greenland by force, and he would not invoke the tariffs against the 8 European nations that sent their military to Greenland to stand up against the U.S. military. So President Trump said, okay, I'll drop the tariffs. I do have a framework for the U.S. working in Greenland. So we understand from multiple sources that some of the details include the U.S. Gaining ownership of the areas of Greenland where the U.S. military bases are located, and that President Trump will also gain control of the entire Arctic Circle, and that the U.S. will have mineral rights in all of Greenland, and that China and Russia will not be permitted to come to Greenland, and the U.S. will continue to be a member of NATO. Now, I have a second source on this framework who comes out and says, yes, the U.S. government will gain ownership of the areas of Greenland where the U.S. military bases are located, and the U.S. will drop the tariffs and remain a member of NATO. And oh, Canada, you want to come against the U.S., but no doubt, Canada, you want to remain defended by the U.S. military, and you want to come under the umbrella of the Golden Dome, don't you? So that's going on. You know, I reported several years ago about the CCP setting up an underground bases in Canada and trying to invade the U.S. I think that was about maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and the U.S. military annihilating the CCP attempted invasions. The U.S. military dropped those bunker buster bombs on the underground basis along the border of Canada and the U.S. So we see Canada apparently has been working in collusion with the deep state to actually come against the U.S. in a military way. So that's going on. Iran. So we have sources that talk about the theocracy and control in Iran. That's where a religion controls the government. But we see a religion in Iran, in my opinion, that has devolved from worshiping God to be virtually a satanic operation against its own people. We've been seeing these uprisings in Iran. What happened to trigger these uprisings? Well, for decades, the people have been brutally controlled through violence by its government and military. But a few weeks ago, the currency in Iran collapsed. People had no money. They could not buy food or medicine or water. Uprisings then come. And we understand in Iran that there are about 1 million Christians. And they have to operate underground. If the the Iranian government or military know that a person is an individual, they're simply taken out. This devolved theocracy does not believe in rights for humans at all. And we believe, we know that this theocracy took down the internet and other communication platforms for the Iranian people because they didn't want the world to see what was actually going on there. But some patriots in Iran have been able to get out some bits and pieces of information. It's believed the Iranian government and the Iranian military have slaughtered in their streets 60,000 plus Iranian people. So as an American, I say to President Trump, we know the U.S. military has been staging in the Middle East for the past 3 to 4 weeks. I say to President Trump, let America bring a deliverance strike in Iran to liberate the people of Iran. So that's going on. And it's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.